Thank you for the very full introduction there. So the reason I put this presentation together about heat, and the focus of this is how to improve the comfort in your own home whilst also reducing cost and carbon. And it also has a little bit of a look into the future at the end about heat pumps and hydrogen and so on. But the reason I felt compelled to put this presentation together a few months back was traditionally my perception has been that people find heat pretty boring, and it's often associated with things that are really dull, like loft insulation. But there are some really interesting insights and practical things people can do to make a real difference. And I think I'm genuinely seeing lots of interest now amongst people I'm meeting in the various things I do. So I've caught the interest of people, and there's a growing interest in heat, particularly with the rising cost of energy and so on. And I'm trying to, through this presentation, help everybody become just a little bit more nerdy about this particular subject than they might be at the moment. So a little bit more about my sort of credentials in this area. 10, 11 years ago, I bought one of these things, a thermal imaging camera, as a little bit of a sort of expensive hobby, really, to do friends and family, and to understand more about building physics and how buildings behave and how people use them. A fantastic bit of kit, and I got trained professionally how to use it. And I've been doing a lot of surveys in the last few months. I've done 30 surveys, home visits around the area here for people in the Northwich area for free with this camera to help me learn more and obviously help people more as well. And it's a fantastic bit of kit that I highly recommend if you can get your hands on one or someone to use one. You can learn an awful lot from one of these things. So I'm very sort of skilled at using one of these things. And then the two eco retrofit projects I did were my own home at the top there. About 13 years ago, we did a big makeover on it with a little bit of extension work. It's a 1955 house, and we put a ground source heat pump in, solar hot water panels, solar electricity panels, a heat recovery ventilation system in it, lots of extra insulation and so on and so on. So that's been a fantastic success. And then the other property at the bottom there is my in-laws property. They bought a bungalow when they moved nearer to us. And they let me do a similar sort of makeover on that 7 or 8 years ago with an air source heat pump in that particular case. And that's been a great success too. So heating in homes is something we have got really used to. And I feel really lucky, I suppose. I was born in an era where, apart from about 6 months when I was in my first job as a fresh graduate, and I lived in a miserable cold farm flat with no installation and no heating. I've lived in centrally heated homes all my life, I think, apart from maybe when I was very baby as well. But generally, we have all been very used to it now for many decades, since the ascendancy of low cost natural gas from the North Sea, the propagation of heating into homes has been pretty much complete, and most homes now have got a central heating system of some sort, mostly on gas, as we're familiar with, and obviously we've got a gas network which is primarily there, really. One of its biggest purposes in life anyway is to serve home heating. So we're very, very used to it, but unfortunately we now have to do something to wean ourselves off it, but also it's become very expensive too. So a little bit more in the home environment and buildings environment. We often think over the years about, you hear about a wind farm will generate enough electricity for 1,000 homes, or a nuclear power station will generate enough electricity for a few thousand homes or a few 100,000 homes. But the energy we use in electricity in a house or in a building is a fraction of the amount of energy that we use to heat. So becoming a self-sustaining home with solar panels, generating your own electricity, and having an electric vehicle to store it, or storage or whatever, is fine. But actually the thing that's the elephant in the room in terms of decarbonisation, and the big challenge, is heat, because we use far more heat energy in a home than we do electricity. And obviously the amount of energy we use to heat a home will vary according to the size of home, the type of home, and the age of it. And this graph information here is quite dramatic, really. It shows the difference in the amount of energy to heat a home for different eras of homes. So the light green bars on the left are for pre-1900 homes, solid wall homes. All of those will be. So if you have a solid wall home of 1900 era or earlier, the amount of energy required to heat it is dramatically different to the latest building regs, which you see on the right-hand side there. And building regs are going to continuing to tighten up as well. So a huge difference in heating requirement for different ages of build and different EPC bands accordingly. But obviously, as you'd expect as well, different property types. Whether you're detached at one end where you've got a large surface to volume ratio and a large volume as well, it takes a lot more energy to heat than your sort of terraces and flats at the left hand end, where you've got a lot of benefit from the buildings around you in terms of the amount of heat pickup and ultimately the support you get heating your home from your neighbours ultimately. So a huge diverse range of heat requirements that this graph I think does a very good job of demonstrating. But there are some scary statistics, really, and I'm still at a loss to understand why we've got some of the gaps we still have in some of the basics in homes in the UK. So if you look across the UK housing stock, about a third of them, about a third of our heat loss is through the walls, and we've still got about 70% of homes in the UK, or 25 to 30% uncavity wall insulated at the moment. We've got a lot of buildings out there, millions and millions of homes that have got cavities that could have cavity wall insulation, which makes a huge difference, obviously, to heat loss. And the cost of it is actually relatively small. It's £400 to £600 for a, depending whether that's a semi or detached. That's a sort of range of costs. It's not expensive. There were scare stories with issues with cavity wall in early days. It wasn't very well regulated in the early days. It's extremely well controlled now. So the risks of any problems downstream from having cavity wall insulation done are minimal. So we still have a huge opportunity, which is very, very easy to fill and not expensive to fill either. So I don't understand why there is hesitancy for people to simply get on and do that for their homes if they haven't got it, because the cost and the payback are really, really good. The second one that still, gets me scratching my head is the number of properties that still don't have either any loft insulation or anywhere near the right amount of loft insulation. A quarter of our heat goes out through the loft. It's extremely cheap. To do it yourself is certainly 50 to 100 quid. I've done it myself. It's a horrible job. You've only got to do it once, but the benefits you get are enormous. So, but we still have, approaching a third of the properties in the UK that don't have any or don't have sufficient loft insulation. So crazy statistics when you look at the cost of doing these things. And people say government should be doing more. It's cheap to do. Why aren't people doing it anyway? Why do people need to get government support to put something in like loft insulation, which will immediately save money the moment you get into any cold weather? And then the last sort of challenge, physical challenge we've got in buildings is the older properties I mentioned earlier. Solid wall properties are awful from a heat loss point of view. The only way you can do to solve that problem is to go for either insulation on the inside of the walls around the home, or on the outside as an outer skin on the home. Very invasive to do that. Not all homes are really suited to do that. You might have lots of nice fixtures and fittings and skirting boards and cornices and stuff on the inside that might put you off doing it. And on the outside, of course, it will change the look of a building if you insulate it and render it rather than having an external brick facade. So solid wall properties, we only have maybe 9 or 10% of the homes in the UK have been insulated, and it's a huge challenge to overcome that, given the cost of doing it and the disruptive nature of insulating solid walls. But unfortunately, if we do want low running costs in our buildings and we want to be comfortable, then these are prices we're going to have to find a way of paying as a nation. Other reasons for doing all this sort of stuff, I've talked about heat loss. If you improve the thermal efficiency of your home, if you get it higher up the EPC band, if you demonstrate it's got lower running costs, there's very strong evidence now that you will increase the value of your home. It's not just about the bills on an operational basis or on the comfort. In looking at the statistics that the Money Supermarket keeps an eye on the whole time, the value increase of a home that's been elevated up the EPC bands is significant come the time that you resell a property, and this data is actually probably 2 years old now, so this will be increasing further and further. And of course, with energy prices now higher and higher, the highest they've ever been, this effect will be more exacerbated going forward. So I think there'll be an even greater demand and an even greater expectation and desire from home buyers in future when they're buying a home to look at the energy costs running it, and how well insulated it is, etc. So I think that will factor more in. So this is another great reason for addressing these relatively dull areas of loft insulation, roof insulation, windows, etc., etc. All these things will help increase the value of a home as well. And I talked about comfort a little bit. I will talk about comfort a lot more shortly, but this is a great way of demonstrating in relative terms comfort, to give you an idea how the UK homes perform. So if you take the average UK home on a day where it's 0 degrees outside and it's 20 degrees inside, if you turn the heating off, the average UK home will have reduced in temperature inside by about 3 degrees. So, a comfortable room at 20, 21 degrees C, where you are probably now, will drop by around about, on average across the UK housing stock, 3 degrees after 5 hours. So that's quite a substantial drop. Some homes will drop a lot quicker than that. I've been in homes recently where they have suspended downstairs floors, for example, and I would expect this figure to be 5 or 6 degrees, given how much heat loss they're losing through their floors and drafts and stuff. But that is an average. So this is an interesting benchmark as a way of getting a feel for what a relatively poorly insulated home is like in terms of the fall in temperature, because on average the UK housing stock isn't brilliant. But comparing that to our continental neighbours is really interesting too. So if you look at the homes in Belgium, very similar to the UK, really, they're historically not brilliant from a thermal insulation and draft point of view. France isn't particularly good either, but a little bit better than us. But look over to the right-hand side, and particularly up into Scandinavia, and Norway's figures there are astonishing. So the average Norwegian home, after 5 hours after the heating goes off, the temperature will have only dropped by 0.9 of a degree C, because they have really taken insulation and draft proofing and glazing really seriously over the years. And of course they're bound to, because it's a much colder climate, but the result is that at any time of year they've got homes that are leaking far less energy than ours do on average in the UK. So I think that's a really interesting way of saying, well, if you do insulate your home really well and you've got good glazing and you do a really thorough job of draft proofing, you can get something towards the sorts of standards that we see in some of these better countries here, whether that's Norway, which is probably a bit of a high bar, but sort of Swedish homes, Danish homes, certainly a lot better here. And you can think about that in your own home and your own comfort levels. Yes, I would like a home that only falls by 1 or 2 degrees rather than 3 degrees, but it's a relative way of getting a feel for how poor the UK housing stock is compared to some of our neighbours. So a little bit about physics and people. I was very lucky to bump in at random to an academic about 5 years ago who studies the thermal comfort of people in an interior environment. And I got to know him quite well, and I learned that there are many factors that affect how comfortable you feel. Obviously, air temperature is one of them. Humidity is also quite a significant factor, but there are many other things as well, such as obviously what you're wearing, how active you've been, what the weather is outside and where you were earlier on, and lots of other things too. But the humidity and air temperature are the two main ones. And the reason I'm showing this, and the reason I'm showing this happy face in the middle, is that most people, and we are all different, that's the point, most people are in the sort of happy band in the middle, where if they're in a room of about 20 degrees C, which is the sort of temperature you'd find an airport at, for example, they tend to be 20, 21. That sort of temperature is a temperature that most people will feel pretty comfortable in. It's a sort of happy zone that suits the vast majority of the population. But there are people who are only comfortable when it's really, really warm, up in the sort of 24, 25 zone. So my personal comfort preference is I like to be 22, 23. So I'm a little bit higher than the median, but not at this extreme. But my in-laws are up in the top right-hand corner there. So whenever I go to their house, if you pardon my language, it's like a bloody oven in the middle of winter, because they've got the thermostat cranked up to about 25 degrees. That's their comfort zone. That's what they're metabolically and physiologically like, and that's their comfort zone for their own personal comfort level. So that's where they are. Thankfully, my wife and I are roughly the same, so we don't get too many arguments about thermostats. But then there are two other interesting categories of thermal preference and types of people. There are people who are at the bottom here, where they are only thermally comfortable when it's cool. And I met an Australian 6 or 7 years ago who moved to the UK for the climate, because he found Australia too hot. He lived in London. He told me in winter he doesn't have his heating on and leaves all his windows open, and he wears short sleeves and he wears shorts. And if it's any more than 15, 16 degrees, he's too hot. So he's quite a rare animal. But I guess we've all been out on the street in winter sometimes and seen somebody out with flip-flops or sandals and no socks on, and wondering how on earth they can be cold, can't be cold. But actually, there are people who are genuinely thermally happy, and only really happy at that low end of the spectrum. And there's one other category of person that is quite rare. I don't know statistically what it is, but there is a band of people, it's probably about 5% of the population, who are comfortable at any temperature in that range. So they can be in a room at 15 degrees, 20 degrees, 25 degrees, and their ability to distinguish the difference between temperatures in those rooms is probably fairly low, but they are actually comfortable across that complete range. They're almost agnostic about the environment they're in. Personally, I wish I was one of them. It would be fantastic to be one of those people. I could go anywhere and I'd be comfortable. But I'm not. I'm in the hot end of the spectrum. But we are all different. So I know there are homes where people have arguments about thermostat. Sometimes it can be around trying to save money. It can be at the sort of mean end of the spectrum, like my brother would be. But it is actually often linked to genuine thermal preferences of individuals, because we are all physiologically different in this unusual spectrum of different sort of preferences that are absolutely genuine and not made up at all. One other thing about physics of heat is masonry, brick walls, block walls conduct heat like crazy. They are incredibly good conductors of heat. If you put your hand on a brick wall or a masonry wall on the inside, it will feel cold. That's because it is sucking heat from your hand. So that's one thing to bear in mind when you think about solid wall homes in particular. You've got something there that is going to be 10, 12, 15 degrees cooler than your hand, sucking heat away, because walls and masonry conduct heat really, really well. Bit more about thermal comfort. So most homes we have in the UK are heated through convection radiators. We shorten it, we abbreviate it to radiators, but they are convection radiators. They warm up with obviously the supply of hot water to them, and then the heat gradually meanders around the room, and you end up with a temperature profile that's quite distinct, with a warmer air at the top, because heat rises. And as it cools, it comes down to the bottom level. So you end up with bands of temperature as you go up from the bottom of a room to the top of the room. And that's how it is. That's how the physics works with convection radiators. There are some downsides with that. It's not optimal for most people. The temperature, as in, when you're driving a car, you'll typically have warm feet and cool face. You would never drive a car, most people would never drive a car along with the settings for the heating and the ventilation, such that you've got warm face and cool feet. Comfort for humans is orientated around having cooler face and warmer feet, and feet dictate comfort. So as well as this being unnatural for a human to be in terms of thermal comfort, you've also got a situation where you've got the temperature being the highest at the ceiling level. It's not really doing anything good up there apart from heating the ceiling. And of course, if you in a top story room, then it's going into the loft through whatever insulation you've got. So it's not a very effective, not a very efficient way of heating the home, and it doesn't align with how humans like to be. And if your feet are cold, you will feel cold and you will want the heating to be on higher. So I've been in many a room where I've felt cold feet, but the room's quite stuffy at my head height. And that's a pretty uncomfortable feeling, actually, if you've got this layering that's very acute like this. And it's very easy to spend a lot of money trying to heat a room to get it warm enough, purely because your feet are actually cold, because they are the canary in the coal mine for most people for how they feel from a comfort point of view. Then the other scenario, or the other way of heating a home, and you may have heard expressions like underfloor heating is far more efficient. It is for several reasons. If you've got an underfloor heated room, you've got a floor that might be at 30 degrees, 25, 30 degrees, maybe a bit more, depending on the temperature outside. As it rises, it gradually warms up the stuff around it, the air around it, and you end up with a temperature gradient that's, largely speaking, it's the opposite of what we see in the top diagram there. And you've got something there that's much more aligned to human comfort levels, much more aligned to the sorts of ways you'd have your air conditioning or your heating system set up in your car. Cooler face, warm feet. So when you walk into a room that's got underfloor heating in it, it always feels magically lovely, because your feet, which are the most important thing generally anyway, will instantly feel warm. And the top part of you is at a much more comfortable temperature. It's a lower temperature than your feet. So that's why, one of the reasons why underfloor heating is so much more efficient, is because it's getting the heat to where most people want it, which is where their feet. So it's a much closer match with human needs. You don't have this situation where you've got high temperatures at the ceiling level, so you're not wasting heat into the void above or to the rooms above. And of course, if you've got pets, they absolutely love it. So there are some low-hanging fruit in terms of things that we can do. Some of these things you may be aware of, some of them I hope you'll find new. Cavity wall insulation I've talked about. It is very easy to do, it's very cheap to do. I have a very personal example of why I think it's so important to do it. So I've got a room in my house that's got a cavity wall that's actually an internal wall. In fact, it's the one behind me here, and I'm in my study bedroom here. So the house was built with cavity wall, and unusually, for some bizarre reason, the builder built part of this room wall in a cavity as well. And my house has got cavity wall insulation, but this particular internal wall doesn't. It was empty. This cavity was when I moved in. And I've got a radiator at the bottom, just like this here, just exactly like this. And I was up in the loft one day, and I can't remember what I was doing, and I put my hand over the top of the cavity, and I could feel warm air rising up. So it was warmth, it was heat energy that was being absorbed by the brickwork, by that, energy hungry masonry I talked about earlier on, that was going into the cavity, and it was just chimneying up into the loft, warming the loft up. And it was a cool loft. The loft was probably about 10 degrees, and that air coming out was probably in the high 20s, something like that. So that hammered home to me the real value of cavity wall insulation. It really, really does work. It was a very, very striking day, and we took action on it. We worked out the volume of the cavity. I got a load of polystyrene pellets and poured them in from the top, and that solved it. But it really is something that's a no-brainer to do if you can do it. Not every cavity can be filled, but if you're able to, do it, because it does make a significant difference, particularly if you've got hot radiators on outside walls. So loft insulation, the dullest subject known to man to most people. Lots of barriers to it. Oh, they've got all sorts of stuff up there. It's not very nice up there, but you've only got to do it once. But there are reasons for doing it other than just saving money in winter. And the one that I've really to learn about in the last few years is it makes a much more comfortable house in summer on hot days. So I had a house 25 years ago, and the upstairs was an oven in summer, hot weather, hot sunny days. It was horrible, despite the fact it had huge windows I could open early in the morning. The upstairs was unbearable in summer, and sleep quality was awful. And only many years later I realized, because I'd only got 3 or 4 inches of loft insulation up there, so I had a hot attic contributing to hot bedrooms. And most people are aware, if they're not, they ought to be aware, that for sleep quality, a bedroom really wants to be no more than 18 degrees, 18, 19 degrees tops. And if you've got an attic that's 30 degrees, 35 degrees, even 40 degrees on a very hot day, and you haven't got enough loft insulation, that is going to translate into a bedroom that's far warmer than you really, really want it. So loft insulation, dull as it is, makes a significant difference in summer as well as winter. And of course, we are getting more extremes of heat in summer as well. So that's another great reason really to knuckle down and get up there and sort the loft out and do it for the summer benefit as well as the winter benefit. And ultimately the sleep quality is immeasurably different to boot. And then similarly, the summer situation with, if you've got a south facing wall and you've got no cavity wall insulation, you're going to be absorbing more heat into the interior of the house. If you've got a south-facing wall, it can easily be at 40 or 45 degrees C on a hot sunny day. And if you haven't got insulation in your cavity, you're going to have that coming through, because it will heat the void of the air in the middle between the 2 courses of bricks. So wall insulation is also something that will significantly benefit homes in summer as well. It's not just a winter thing. A little bit more about physics and the way heat behaves. This is a fantastic diagram that animated diagram that somebody at Siemens has done and put online very helpfully, showing the flow from a radiator in a sort of convection way, as I showed a little bit earlier, gradually meandering up the wall and across the ceiling, and this will be going down the other side of the room. But we have a habit in the UK in particular of putting radiators under windows. Traditionally, it's because windows were seen as that's the cold end of the room. We want to balance out the room so it doesn't feel cool at one end, and also because people don't like to have a radiator on an internal wall because it means they might want to put furniture against it. But as you can see here on the right, if you put a radiator under a window, the effect on the flow of air is dramatically different. It's far less efficient in terms of getting the heat into the room. Glazing systems, glass glazing is not very insulative anyway. Double glazing has come a long way. I'll talk about that shortly, but it's still nowhere near as good an insulator as a wall. So it's the most lossy part of the outside of a house is your windows. So if you've got all this air that's gradually being circulated beautifully up, around this window aperture from this lovely hot radiator underneath, you're actually increasing the amount of loss through the windows. So putting radiators under windows really isn't a good idea. If you have an opportunity to change that, do so. But then we also have a bad habit sometimes, particularly in bed and breakfast, but also I've seen it in homes as well, and guest houses as well. People put full-length curtains in front of radiators and then draw them at night. And of course, that's going to make the situation even worse. That's really sending a message to all that heat. I'm not really bothered about having that heat in the home. Just go through the window, please, because if you draw that curtain, you will actually be able to, if you stood there, you'd be able to instantly feel a difference in terms of the heat, the reduction in the heat that's getting into the room. So drawing curtains across a radiator like that is absolutely bonkers. And I would urge anybody that has got that to get the sewing machine out and shorten the curtains, or simply not do it. It is bonkers from a heat loss point of view. I finally persuaded my wife. I finally won the battle. This is our guest bedroom. We used to have the curtains hanging like they do on the left here, which clearly break the rule that I've showed here on the right in a slightly less extreme way. They're not full-length curtains, but as you can see, this left-hand situation here, the heat is just going to go behind the curtain into the window aperture, and some of it will, if we're lucky, end up back in the room. So I finally succeeded in persuading her that we should have a house where we tuck the curtains in behind the radiators in the way I've shown here on the right, and she's reluctantly accepted that that's what we shall do, and that's what we do from now on. But shutting curtains in general is a very good idea. It's an old traditional sort of way of helping to reduce heat loss. Anything that puts a barrier between the warmth of the room and the windows is worth doing. Even with double glazing, do it. And also you can use curtains proactively in summer as well on the south facing side to keep heat out during the day. That's what they do in Europe. They keep curtains shut during the day and they open them in the evening, and open the windows in the evening in hot weather. So curtains can be used very proactively to good effect as well, and our curtains are nearly always drawn. The neighbours probably think we're out most of the time. And keeping doors shut also is really, really important. If you've got different rooms with different radiator settings, you may have rooms you don't actually use very often. Keep the doors shut. You know, why are you letting a heat from the warm room try and warm up a room that you don't use very often? So keeping doors shut is really useful to do from a heat loss point of view. And keep the heat for a radiator where you want it, which is the room that it's in, not the room next door. So then we're on to other simple low-hanging fruit. So we're all familiar with these things: thermostatic radiator valves. I've done 30 energy surveys in the last 2 or 3 months visiting homes, and I only found one person who knew how these actually worked. So these are brilliant, except most people, because they don't realize they work, they use them in error. So wherever I go, I nearly always find these set to number 5, or they're set to 0. And these are actually really smart devices at controlling temperature. They don't just control the flow of the water through a radiator. They actually respond to the temperature in the room. So if these things are set to number 5, they don't control the temperature at all. So they don't do anything except let the radiator carry on getting the room as warm as it will be. So people set them to number 5. They will go into a room. The room's too hot, so they will turn it down to number 0 or down to 1 or something, and then the room, of course, will get too cold. And in actual fact, what you should do is start off with them set at about number 3, because number 3 is actually around about 20 degrees C. So if you've got these at number 3, if you've got these things, set them at number 3 to begin with. And if the room's too cold, just nudge it up fractionally. Don't go to number 4 or number 5, just nudge it up fractionally. And these things will respond really, really sensitively and adjust the room temperature just that bit more to another 0.5 degree, another 1 degree. But what people do is they'll go into a room, the room won't be warm enough, they'll turn it up to number 5, and then it's not doing its job, it's not controlling. So you overheat a room, you waste energy. So in an ideal world, these things would have a temperature rating on them, you know, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, whatever. But they don't do that, probably for good reason. But they are actually, that gauge, that scale on these things is actually a representative of temperature. So only have them at the setting that you actually need for a room. So what I do in our spare room here actually is I've put a felt tip pen mark on the setting that we like for the radiator and the room temperature to be when visitors come. So we set it to about number 4 in that particular room as a simple way of getting it to where it should be if somebody's come along and tampered with it. So these things are really good. They are really, really good, and do focus on using them, because you will save a lot of gas by limiting the amount of overheating of any room that these things are in. And you can go a step further. I've got a few of these things around the house. They are electronic thermostatic radiator valves. They're very cheap to buy. I've had them for many years now. They've got a couple of AA batteries in them that last 6 months or so, last a winter, and you can set individual rooms with precise temperatures at different times of day. So you can have your heating on in the evening for 4 hours, and yet you can set it so that the bedroom only warms up an hour before you go to bed. So you can have bespoke heating arrangements for each room that you have these things in. They're pretty easy to program. You can get Bluetooth ones now, you can get Wi-Fi ones as well. And if you want to tweak the temperature, you don't have to go into menus. You just turn the dial, that sort of round feature on the end there on the left, and you can nudge it from 18 degrees as it's set here to 18.5 or 19, and they respond fantastically well. and they're very, very accurate as well. So if you've already got the old mechanical type, do get the electronic ones and have a play. Just get one, have a play. They're very easy to fit. You don't need a plumber. It's literally a 2-minute job to take the old one off and fit the new one. There's no chance under the sun of you being able to do it and leak water everywhere. It's a dry operation entirely. So those things are fantastic. So anything to create a better control and a more appropriate control for an individual room will save you money. And overall, proper zone management, whether that's shutting doors, drawing curtains, having individual controls in rooms like these here that are used in the right way, you can save anywhere in the sort of 10 to 30% savings of your gas bill, or your energy bill, your heating bill. And that's just not my judgment. That's from a range of surveys that have been done. And I would definitely say from the surveys I've done recently that in most of the homes, they could easily save 15–20% just by using thermostatic radiator valves properly. Drafts, there's many sites that say, you need to fix drafts. People don't knuckle down and do it, in my experience. It's a bit of a detective exercise sometimes, but sometimes they're often very easy to fix. So UPVC doors have been a fantastic step forward in terms of improving insulation and reducing drafts, but they do go out of adjustment. This one here is shown the sort of cooler areas down the left hand side and at the bottom. They frequently go out of adjustment. They're very easy to adjust yourself. You just go down, find the draft. It's usually in a corner, get a screwdriver out, adjust the striker plates, and you can improve them. So people, I've known people saying that door is getting drafty, I need to get a new door. I don't believe you do. UPVC doors should last for decades, and if they've become drafty, adjust them or get some foam seal to fill up a gap, or get new seals, which you can do as well. The basic structure will last 100 years, so there's absolutely no need to change doors in most cases, and windows too, in my experience. UPVC stuff is fantastic. It just needs a bit of TLC and a bit of care and attention to actually fix the drafts. Letterboxes are getting better these days, but still often I'm finding letterboxes that have got a lovely gale coming through them. It's a great way of heating the front driveway. And if you've got a hallway, conversely, it will often mean a hallway feels a bit cool, and often it can be a letterbox, quite easy to fix with a second layer on the inside. And then the other little sin I keep finding is wherever a plumber or an electrician has put pipes through to a loft or into a garage or any outside space, they never, ever, almost never, ever consider filling up the gaps around their pipe work afterwards. So there's many hot water cupboards I've been to, immersion cupboards I've been to, where there are pipes going up into a loft like that, and there is air, lovely warm air at 30 degrees C or something, billowing gently out into the loft, which is a lovely thing if you're a wasp and you're looking for somewhere nice and warm for winter for a queen. But it's very simple to bung up these sorts of very discrete little losses, but they do make a significant difference to the overall bill over years, and it's very, very easy to fix. It just needs looking for. Some other tips from me about rooms that you might only use occasionally. So we've got a couple of rooms in the house, which bedrooms. I use one as a study. My wife uses one for sewing. We don't bother heating them anymore. This isn't my study, by the way. Mine's not as posh as this at all. But we don't heat them at all now because we're only in there 2–3 hours a week, maybe. At most 4 or 5. So we don't have that on anymore. We started off using the occasional fan heater just to sort of heat it whilst we're in there, but I don't like fan heaters. They dry out the air too much. It's not a very comfortable environment, and actually they do chuck a lot of heat around the room and warm the room up eventually, but don't warm me up that quickly. And in the last year or two, I've discovered these things, halogen heaters, which are about 20 quid. They heat the objects around them. On the lowest setting, cost me 12p an hour to run. So I have one right by my feet. I'm instantly warm. It's just heating me, really, and my hands and my chair. And it's an extremely cheap way of heating any room or you in a room that you only use occasionally, because there's no point in heating all the books up or all the walls up. All you want to do when you're in an occasional use room like this is warm you up for the time you're in there, and a halogen heater is a very efficient way of doing that. So for people who are working at home in particular, where they're thinking in the winter, I want to work in from home for the next 3 days, it's pretty cold weather, do I put the heating on or do I sit there with a blanket around me? If you leave the heating off and get one of these things on in front of you, it's a much cheaper way of keeping yourself warm, and cleaner and greener as well. The next subject is quite a tricky one to explain, and I've only really started to try and talk about this quite recently, so bear with me. This is quite a nerdy subject, but there is a significant opportunity in the UK for improving the way condenser boilers work, because the vast majority of them aren't set up correctly and aren't set up efficiently. So heating systems, as you're familiar with, you've got a hot feed going around your radiators, and the radiator loses heat into the room, and the water coming back to the boiler is a bit cooler. It's in the range of 10 to 20 degree difference between the temperature going out to the radiators and the temperature coming back in the boiler. So okay, that's how a basic heating system works, through losing heat into a room and the temperature reducing on the return pipe. But boilers work at different efficiencies depending on the temperature of the water going around the system, and particularly with the return temperature, it makes a huge difference. And I'll show you some more numbers in a moment that I'll reveal. So if your boiler is set at a very high temperature, so that you've got a return temperature of sort of 55 to 70, you've got very hot radiators. So if you've got cherry red radiators in winter with water going around at 80 and coming back at 60 or something, your efficiency of your boiler will be in this sort of 87, 88% range. And there's only a small difference depending on which end of this temperature range you're at. So if you've got very hot radiators, your boiler will be 87, 80% efficient, roughly. But a condenser boiler, for it to be effective, the return temperature needs to be below 54 degrees. And if you can get it below 54 degrees and much lower than 54 degrees, you can make significant differences to the boiler efficiency. So 16 years ago, condenser boilers all became a standard fitment. It was mandatory that any new boilers had to be condensing, but they will only operate as condensing boilers in condensing mode if the return temperatures are below 54. And the reasons are the figures here shown on that right-hand column there. As you can see, the lower you can get your radiator temperatures, and the greater the efficiency of the boiler. And most of the homes, apart from 2 out of the 30 homes that I visited, had return temperatures that were way above, certainly most of them above or way above 55 degrees. So I have found very few boilers of the homes I've visited that are actually set up correctly by the gas engineer that fitted them. And if you can get it down from 55 degrees to 35 degrees by having lower output temperatures, therefore lower return temperatures, the efficiency of the boiler goes up, and you can save yourself on an average home, I think it's a 3-bed semi type figure, a saving of £65 on your gas bill, with no change in comfort levels at all, other than you might need to put the heating on a little bit earlier, but it will save you about 8% of your energy bill simply by turning the boiler temperatures down and getting it into condensing mode. So it is a national scandal that is almost impossible to fix. Unfortunately, it's so rooted in the way that boiler engineers work, and it's such a difficult problem to fix. But there is a national opportunity there for everyone, your friends, your family, your neighbours, to look at their boiler temperatures and work out whether they are working in condensing mode or not. How will you know it's in condensing mode? Some boilers, you have a digital display on it that says what the flow temperature is. This is the output temperature, not the return temperature, unfortunately. This is the one that is sometimes shown on the display. If it's set at 80, there's no way the return is going to be at 54. But what you can do is, simply touch the return pipe. If it's too hot to touch, it's definitely more than 54. But the other telling clue is if you look on the outside of a flue on a boiler that's a condenser boiler, if you see plumes of steam coming out, it's not working in condensing mode. So that's a simple telltale. If you see a house with steam coming out the flue, the boiler temperatures are set too high, and that home is wasting up to 8% of the gas that it's paying for. Is a very simple way of looking at it and working out whether you have got an opportunity or not. There's plenty of websites to tell you about this sort of stuff. There was a very good Sun news item on it a few weeks ago, which was actually technically very good, very correct. If you Google, condenser boiler flow temperatures, there's loads of stuff out there that's pretty good and pretty easy to understand, but it is worth persevering with, both from a cost point of view and a carbon point of view. But it is currently a madness situation that is very, very low hanging fruit, because it just means turning the dial down a little bit to save 8% on your gas bill. So things that we can all do that require a little bit more effort, those are all the low hanging fruit. There's a good range of what are known as smart thermostats on the market. They've been around for 8 or 10 years now. The original sort of one that really shook the world up was a product called Nest. These things are for sale in B&Q. There's a range of them in B&Q next to the conventional stuff. These things are very clever because they learn the way the building behaves in different weather and what the weather is going to do tomorrow. So these systems will say, well, I can see the weather forecast for tomorrow is going to be a bit colder and a bit windier, and I know how the house behaves in that environment, so I'll adjust the heating settings accordingly. So they interact with the house and learn the behavior of the house, and only put the heating on when necessary to get it to the temperature that you want. So if it knows that you get up in the morning at 8:30, because it will know that, because it's got sensors in it, it will know that it needs to start at 7:54 in the morning, or 7:25 in the morning, or 6:45 in the morning, and it knows what settings to use to get it to the temperature you want for when you typically get up. So it learns about the building physics, it learns about occupancy through a sensor on the front of it, and it's a very smart way of saving money without any impact on your lifestyle at all. So these are for 100 to 150 quid a pop to buy. Pretty easy to fit, I'm told. I haven't tried doing one myself, and there have been sort of independent sort of assessments of how much energy you can save, and the figure that academics, if you like, will stand by is you can save 67% of your gas. I think if you tune into these things and really feed them with the information they need to get them going better and so on, you can get considerably more than that, probably 20 or 30% in my view, through using these things. So you think about the cost of these things, how much they are to buy, how much you can pretty reliably save in terms of your gas. The business case for these is a payback of a year, 18 months. So why wouldn't you do it? Glazing has come a long way. The loss through modern glazing compared to traditional single glazing is significantly better these days. So so the original sorts of early developments of glazing got us to a sort of 50% reduction compared to single glazing in terms of the amount of heat loss through glass and window frames and so on. And over the last decade, 15 years, it's come down even further. So even if you've got double glazing from say 15, 20 years ago, the technology has moved on significantly now, and you can actually upgrade your double glazed units without taking the whole frame out, and actually get substantial improvements in heat loss just by changing the glazed units, not necessarily the whole frame. So glazing has come a long way. It's still a lot more lossy from an energy point of view than walls, but it has come a long way. So even if you have double glazing, certainly if the units are starting to get a bit condensing on the inside and failing, and you've got a room maybe where you particularly want it to feel warm and keep warm, do consider upgrading your double glazing, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the whole frame. But it has come a long way, but it's probably got as far as it can go without going for triple glazing, which is quite a lot more expensive, and you get another third off your loss roughly by going for triple glazing if you did want to go for something as extreme as that. Other simple tips: If you're taking a radiator off to decorate a wall, silver foil stuff insulation on the wall behind is really good. Even if it's on an internal wall, it will help reflect the heat into the room rather than absorb it into the masonry. As I said earlier, it's pretty hungry for heat, is masonry. So I always put foil on whenever I take a radiator off the wall. It's you know, £3 or £4 to do it, and it will only save you a modest amount of money, particularly on an internal wall, but it'll help the room warm up quicker with that reflective surface on there. And then the other thing I've tuned into over the years is the distance between the radiator and the wall is important. If you have a radiator that's really uptight, close against the wall, and I have seen radiators where there may be only ½ an inch between the radiator and the wall, that's really a fantastic way of heating the wall up. If it's an external wall, that's particularly bad, obviously. But why heat the wall up preferentially? And particularly if it's an outside wall. So I would always advise people, if they're hanging a radiator, you've got two choices of the bracket, which way around the bracket go to space it either close to the wall or away from the wall. Always put it away from the wall. It may not look quite as sightly. It may not be quite as convenient when you want to put furniture against it, but it will help keep the heat into the room and away from the wall, because if they're tight up against the wall, you've got the radiator there blasting heat out straight into the masonry, not where it needs to be, which is where you are. And then the biggest, I think this is the last slide on radiators, the cardinal sin you sometimes see in hotels in particular, but I have seen it at the odd home, is radiator covers. The clue is in the word cover. It covers the heat up. Heat will eventually get into the room, but it really is giving a very preferential arrangement for that radiator to push as much heat as it can into the wall, and only a small amount will drift eventually into the room. So these things are an absolute no-no and a disastrous thing to do. So please don't ever do it. If you have done it, take it out. Suspended downstairs floors are a really sad challenge. If you're living in a home with suspended floors, you will know the pains of how it feels in winter often, because typically it's just floorboards and carpet, and underneath you've got a void there that is open to the outside atmosphere with vent bricks around the side. So you've got a temperature underneath there that's not a lot different to the outside. So if you've got a freezing cold day outside, you might have air underneath there at 7 or 8 degrees or something, which means a pretty cold floor. It also means drafts around the edges, drafts between the floorboards, and what to do with those. There's several different ways you can tackle that. The quick and easy one, which I did in one of my early houses that was a nightmare, was I went around the edge with a sort of wallpaper scraper and foam and newspaper and whatever I could to ram into the gap. And then I sealed it up with decorator's cork. That's something that's very easy to help reduce the drafts at the edges. And then the other thing I did, and I have done it since, and I recommend everywhere I go, is the use of this stuff, which is the old-fashioned recycled wool carpet underlay. You can still get it. It's not really very much different to modern underlay in terms of cost, but the thicker ones of these, which is about 18 mil thick, is equivalent to a 4-tog quilt. So I did this on that particular house, and between doing that and sealing the drafts up at the edges, it made a huge difference. It was a horrible room, the room I had with it, and doing both of these two things, which was a very cheap thing to do, it made a dramatic difference to the heat loss from that room and the comfort in that room. You can go further. You can insulate from underneath, or insulate. The most invasive way to take the boards up, if you can get underneath and do it, you can do these sorts of things also. It's a horribly invasive thing to do, but it will again make a huge difference to a room. But the thing that you can do that is really the best solution of all is to spray foam underneath. There are companies who will do it. If there's enough space, you need about ½ a meter, I think it is, for crawling space to be able to realistically do it. and the cost. I had a friend of mine who did it recently. He got a company and they did it. They cost them about £35 a square metre to do it. So actually it was a very cheap thing to do, and it completely transformed what was, again, a horrible room. So this is the best solution by far, spraying stuff underneath. And if there isn't the crawling space to get a human being under there with the spray gun, there's a company called Qbot, a small British company, who've got a robot on the end of a long flexible wire and tube that goes into an air brick, and it goes around and it sprays under there in the way a human would go under there and do it as well. So they can access the ones that are really difficult to access as well. So suspended floors are awful from a heat loss and comfort point of view, but there are several different stages of intervention you can do to make a difference, and it really is worth it. So there were some bigger changes, and how on earth they were going to get away from setting fire to fossil fuels. We've got a ban on new gas boilers in new build coming in from 2025. So any new property will have to have a zero local or a low carbon heating source from 2025 onwards, and retrofit into older homes with gas boilers is currently set to be banned in 2035. So for the time being, for existing homeowners, that ban doesn't take force for another 13 years or so. So we've got time, but we've still got an awful lot of homes out there. You know, we've got 28 million or so existing gas boilers, mainly gas boilers. And what on earth are we going to do to get away from those? So there are solutions. One is heat pumps. I'm showing a picture of a fridge freezer because a fridge freezer or a freezer or a fridge, they are heat pumps devices. Basically, there are one or sometimes two heat pumps in these things. So we're very familiar with heat pumps, and it's a very established technology that most people aren't aware they've already got a heat pump in their home. And in actual fact, the first heat pump used in a domestic building was in the world was in 1945 in Norwich, which was some stately home somewhere that had the first prototype one running off a river, I think, in terms of getting its heat. So they've actually been around a long time as a technology. So it's new to most people's vocabulary here in the UK, but actually they've been around for many decades, and they take different forms. There is what's called an air source heat pump, which is a box very similar to the one you see here on the outside of this home, which gathers its thermal energy from the air around the home. Even in winter, yes, it does work. Even below zero, it does work, and you can heat a home very successfully with it. There is then the sort of more expensive solution is ground source heat pumps, which either pick up their heat from horizontal loops of pipe going around a garden, but you need a very big garden. So they're pretty rare doing it that way. Or you can go vertically down with boreholes to get heat from the ground under the property and the property in the area surrounding a property. And that's what I've got. I've got two boreholes in the drive at my home. So heat pumps come in two different basic forms. There are many in Europe. 10% of the homes in Europe are heated by them. Very common in Scandinavia. And already in the UK, there are something like 600,000. So although they are quite new to people, as I say, most people won't really have heard of them. They're actually a very well-established technology in Europe, and more so than most people would realize in the UK as well. And they're clever because they're very efficient. So for 1 unit of energy, electricity, they will bring in between 2.5 and 4.5 units of energy of heat from the outside of the house or from the ground around the house. So they use electricity to draw heat into the home. The electricity itself doesn't heat the home. They use it as a tool to extract heat from the air around the house. So it's thermally transferring heat from outside to inside, and it's a very efficient use of electricity. They use lower temperatures than boilers do, and because the temperatures are a bit lower than boilers, for the water going around the radiators, you actually leave it on 24/7. So the beauty, one of the wonderful things about having a heat pump, which is one of the reasons we were so keen to have one, was that the house is always at the same temperature. You know, our kitchen area, which is our heart of the home, if you like, the room we use for most of the time we're in the house, we're in the kitchen, is at 23, 24 degrees all the time, 24 hours a day. If I want to go down for a glass of milk at 4 a.m. in the morning, it's at the same temperature. It's lovely. So you never walk into a home that's cold, or you know, you got to turn the heating on because you just got back from holiday. The heating is on pretty much 24/7. And there are no servicing needs either, really. In 13 years, we've had nothing happen to ours. No need for any routine servicing. So you don't have the sort of annual service that you have to with a gas boiler. But they are more expensive. They're different to install. It's a different animal. It's not a white box on your wall in the kitchen. So how you interface one to a home and the ease with which you do that and the disruption will be different from home to home. So, you know, I've been to homes where people have said, how could I fit a heat pump here? And in some cases, it would be very easy because the boiler's there and you take that out and you can put the heat pump there and you can have your hot water tank there. And the actual amount of disruption to do it be very easy. In some of the homes, it's quite difficult to work out how you would get the heat from the heat pump to the radiator circuit at the other side of the house, and where the hot water tank might be, and so on and so on. So it's very much a lottery as to how invasive it is to fit one. But if you are in the mode of being interested, I'll happily talk to anybody and come and visit homes and say, you know, how it would work and where they might put stuff, and give people a practical understanding of how to actually integrate one of these into their homes, because it is a different kettle of fish, but it is the main tool for getting away from gas and oil in the UK. It is the best option, and they do work brilliantly well. The costs will come down to a degree, but you know, how much is hard to say. But the great thing is there was a £5,000 government grant towards these, which is really helpful, and brings it to the point where the difference between moving to an air source heat pump is not that much more in some cases than renewing your boiler. Then the other potential solution for heating homes and getting us off natural gas is hydrogen boilers. It's a lovely concept. It'd be brilliant if we could do it, but there are many buts. So hydrogen boilers mean you would have hydrogen in your pipe to your house instead of methane. A very minimally disruptive change from the homeowner's point of view, because where you have your gas boiler now, you'd have a hydrogen gas boiler instead. And the boiler manufacturers are starting to make boilers now that you can convert to hydrogen as well at a later date. So from that point of view, it's a very like-for-like switch with a conventional gas boiler. But current boilers aren't compatible, and they won't be able to be retrofitted either. You won't be able to have your current boiler changed to hydrogen because everything about it will be tweaked and need to be adjusted in the design of it to make it work with hydrogen. It's fine for new products that are coming out, but if you've got a boiler that's currently been designed for natural gas, you won't be able to use it on hydrogen. But there are deeper problems than that. There are no commercial sources of zero carbon hydrogen. It's likely to be more expensive on an energy bill, from an energy bill point of view, and the cost of the gas is likely to be more expensive than natural gas. And also it's not compatible with all of the gas grid. Hydrogen attacks cast iron in particular, and some of our gas grid is still cast iron, albeit it's gradually being replaced. So it's not something we can simply switch to in an overnight sort of way, much as it would be lovely to do so, for all the reasons above. And there's one final sort of headache in it all, which is you'd have to have everyone in a town or a part of a town or in a street agreeing to convert to hydrogen for the whole street to be converted. If you've got 20 houses in a row and there are 2 homes that want to stick with natural gas and they don't want to go to hydrogen, you wouldn't be able to do it because you'd have to have everyone wishing to switch over at the same time. So that creates an issue that may be a thorn in the side of this as well. So it's a lovely concept, but it's going to be expensive, and it's in terms of the cost of energy, cost of heating homes, and the infrastructure needed behind the scenes, heat pumps actually is a much better solution. Very near the end now, so just one other thing to say about how we might heat homes in the future. Very common in Europe are heat networks, where heat from low carbon sources such as biomass boilers or waste heat from industry is used to heat towns or parts of towns or buildings in the locality. Very common in Europe. There are a few heat networks in the UK. There's a large one in London in Pimlico that's been around for decades, and there are a few smaller ones scattered around. So doing that, so you have a hot and cold water pipe to your home effectively, is something that is certainly for certain types of homes, particularly terraces, rows of terraces, would be a very efficient way of giving people low cost, low carbon heat. But obviously that is a cultural bridge to try and cross, because people in the UK just aren't used to heat networks. They've probably never heard of them. The idea of moving away from having control over their own gas boiler to having a hot and cold pipe coming into a little box in the corner of the lounge that provides all their heat, and there's an external provider, is something that will take the British population a bit to get used to. So a fantastically efficient way to do it. And it's well proven and very cost effective all round, but there will be probably barriers out there on the sort of acceptance side that could cause problems for that. But it is, it is one of the great tools in the toolbox if we can help get the UK population into the right headspace for trying this stuff out. So after this presentation, I hope you do become a bit more of a nerd, and even if it's only that you on the next cold day in sort of October, November, cold windy day, do at least go around your doors and windows looking for drafts and working out how you can fix them, because they're usually incredibly easy to fix. And if you really want to have fun and you're looking for someone to give you a Christmas present and they're after ideas for what to get you for Christmas, get one of these things. It's a great stocking filler to ask for. It's an infrared thermometer. They're only about 12 quid, available pretty much everywhere online. Even Toolstation and Screwfix sell them, I think. And it's a great way of understanding temperature in a home, what surfaces are different temperatures at different times of day. Super toy to play with, and a much cheaper way of achieving some of the learning you get from a thermal camera. So cheapest chips and a fantastic bit of technology. So that's it on that talk. I do 3 other talks. I think I'm doing the electric vehicles talk to you in the near future, which is all about the facts and what are the facts, my user experiences, and trying to kill a few myths. I've also got another talk I do on how the UK is really doing in climate change. But a big part of that is how to keep positive, because it is a pretty looming and at times very sobering challenge. And then the other presentation I've recently put together is on misinformation about climate change and decarbonisation, where it comes from, how it spreads, and how to spot it, because it isn't always obvious, and the sources of it aren't necessarily what you might expect. It's very, very complicated space. So that's a fascinating subject that I'd be delighted to talk about if anybody's interested. So thank you very much.